Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Mignot, CEO Experience Agency D-Flash. Each week I bring on someone from business, entrepreneurship, academia, and we just talk about how they got there and what they're up to today. And in this really unique climate that we are in, as we struggle to get through coronavirus, but also with regard to what's happening with Black Lives Matter and how much this affects the Black community, I couldn't have thought of a more important guest to have on my show than Dr. Portia Hunt, who's Professor Emeritus from Temple University. We're going to talk about race, culture, and what the heck is happening. So it's going to be a fantastic conversation. Take a listen. Hi, Portia.
Hi, how you doing, Laura?
World's on fire. How about you? David.
Oh my, yeah.
But that being said, it is a time for good conversations. And even if the world is on fire, the podcast still has not changed. So the first question still remains the same. Portia, what was your first job?
My first job, oh my gosh, I used to be director of a preschool, and I also, I'm from East St. Louis, Illinois, so I've been here since 1975. And my first job was a director of a preschool, and I also did work as a family worker with the Old Head Start group. And this was in the 70s, yeah. I directed a school that had about 100 children in it and about 17 teachers who were people who were interested in childcare in preschool. And these were teachers from the community. So that's the first job that I did. Gosh, it takes me back so long ago.
But yet it seems like your first job relates to like what you do now in teaching and guiding folks who want to learn. So what was that journey like from being that director at their preschool to being the fantastic professor?
You know, I'm old as dirt. Let me just say that, but that's not quite true, but it's close to it.
And
But,
you know what my response to that is? Black cracks never.
Oh gosh.
No, what? No, what?
So I came to Philadelphia in 1975, and I thought I would be here for 2 years. And what I did for that long haul was train therapists in at the master's and doctoral level, and I was chair of the counseling psych program for a long while. And I was preparing people to go back and do therapeutic work in different communities, but I have very strong drive or a vision of teaching people how to work with African Americans who have been traumatized and who were presenting with a lot of emotional, biological, emotional struggles and economic struggles. And so my goal was to prepare people to work in high risk, high traumatized areas. And that's what I did when I came to Philly. So I came when I was in my late 20s. I had a doctorate from Indiana State University in Terre Haute and a specialty looking at African American culture. So that's what I've been doing. In therapy, I still do that. I started one of the first diversity companies in 1986 called Eclipse Consultant Group. And in the, about 2005, I started the National Center for Family Recovery. I was Southeastern director for FEMA and PEMA and the city of Philadelphia, working with evacuees that were coming in from New Orleans.
Wow.
So that's like a thumbnail. And my passion was dance and theater.
Of course.
Yes, theater was a big thing for me. I used to dance with a woman named Catherine Dunham, way back when.
Wow.
It was years ago. And I helped start the Black Artists Group in St. Louis.
So you haven't been busy your entire career. You've just been hanging out, just doing one or two things, nothing but anything.
Yeah, I keep getting tickled by that old Jamaican joke. I got 15 jobs. But I've loved all the things I've done in my life. I really have. Yeah.
Phenomenal. I think, obviously this is being recorded as, many of our cities are burning. And I think, yeah, especially for me as a Black woman in business, getting a lot of emails and calls from my white friends, and
Hmm.
I don't know what to
Yeah.
do. How do I respond? And my response has been, please give money,
Hmm.
and don't ask me to help you figure this out. I love you, but don't ask. I think so. I mean, obviously you're a psychologist. What is like the appropriate response? Like, how can our white friends who want to help and want to understand? Because I think there is this weirdness around what Black trauma is, and I think if people could understand a little bit more what that really, how that equates itself in so many different ways, I think that go a long way to helping people get some understanding.
Yeah, a lot of people are interested, white people and people of color, in what do we do now? And I think, I've told people, especially European Americans, do your own work. And by that I mean, we want to come in, we want to change stuff without understanding where it came from or what it's about. And so, as an activist and a person who is deeply, deeply committed to changing the trajectory of human relationships, I talk with them about doing your own work. And what does that look like? That looks like starting to figure out and talk with people in your family about the messages that you got and learned about race and about understanding structural racism and how it operates. So, a perfect example of that right now is what's going on with the coronavirus. Who is affected most by it? People who have mandatory jobs, who are usually socioeconomically at the bottom of the strata. They are the ones then who are most impacted by it because they're the ones that's helping us make it. And the reason why so many of us are at the bottom of the strata, the economic strata, is because of poverty and structural racism. That's part of how we got here. And for white people to want to come in and rescue people is problematic for me, especially when you don't understand how your unearned privilege got you to where you are. So I'm not interested in vilifying people, but I am interested in setting up a climate where we begin to look at ourselves, how we got to where we got to, and then how we were socialized to believe certain things. So, for example, with the murder of George Floyd, how did that officer know to kill that man? And that thinking he would probably get away with it.
He was
Um,
resisting.
right, right. You know, and I've also spoken to Black officers who believe the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the
Yeah, the
structure
opposite for Asian. We're so like, it's not like it's just a racial thing. It's a police thing.
it is a police culture is militaristic. The purpose of that is to keep people in their place, to reduce um, any violence and all of that. And I know that police officers are very, very important, supposedly for protecting people. But this whole belief that people don't matter and that you can force people to get in line only works for a short time period. Um, and so it's very disturbing to me when I've heard um, white African American Latino officers who run amok in terms of knowing that they, quote, have the power, can so insidiously take someone's life without even thinking about it. How did he know to do that? Had the man been a European American, would he have been treated like that? My response is probably no. He would not have been treated that way. So the structural nature of racial superiority is woven throughout our culture. And we all buy into it. That's what the implicit bias research showed, that whether you're Black or white, you still are going to believe on some level that Blacks belong on the bottom and that their lives are expendable. Same is true for Native Americans and for Latinx Americans. So unless you start, you can start wherever you need to start, but you've got to get back to the place of who am I? How did I get these values? Where did they come from? How is that informing how I'm behaving with other people? And that's something that really disturbs me deeply when I began to think about what we need to do next. If you don't do the self-examination, it's going to be tokenism or maybe meaningless in the end.
It's so true. I think it's very much that, you have to do your own work. Look at your own families and what you see and and the things that you say, because I think last week was compounded because it started with the Amy Cooper situation here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was the morning. And then by the evening, it was George Floyd. But 2 weeks earlier, it was Breonna Taylor. 2 weeks before that, it was Ahmaud Arbery. And, and now we have riots. And some of the riots are with just random people just destroying things and how they can destroy things. But then there are other folks who it's frustration of losing their job, it's systemic poverty, and people are just breaking. How do we as a people start to fix this?
I think we have to start by listening. We have to start by listening deeply. And we have to start also with getting back in touch with what compassion is all about. The people who are rioting out there, talk about complexity. It's unbelievable. The activists and the organizers that I know are all peaceful. Who are the ones that are tearing this down? Some people are white extremists, some people are African Americans, some people are, the whole range is there. But the purpose behind it is constructive. All of the riots and all of that, there's an element that crosses racial and social class lines that I think is going on. And I don't, fixing it has got to start with listening. It has got to start with deep listening. And in doing so, coming up with a vision of what it looks like to enter into a world where people are equal, and to design that. We're starting from a very weird place because of our legacy, and the belief that, again, certain groups of people don't deserve to live. And it's the sad thing about it is it really cuts across all cultures. The untouchables in India would be an example. So it's gonna involve the shift in our understanding who we are as social beings. I'm deeply, deeply angry and hurt about what's going on in our country. I'm also very hopeful, I mean, when you think about it, what we had happening in the 70s, you would have never seen as many European Americans out there putting their life on the line.
It's shocking, but refreshing to see that it's breaking through. Like when you see that there's an army of white women who's like protecting African American protesters, you're like, okay,
yes,
all right,
yeah,
this could actually be different.
Yeah, and I also saw something online today with a group of African American men protecting police officers. And they had encircled them. And it's a strange picture. So you have these black men on, and this police officer standing behind them, with his uniform on. And I don't know what community that was in, but they were protecting the cops because violence begets violence. The only thing that drives this out, as King said, is love. You cannot drive violence and hatred out with violence and hatred. Doesn't mean that I don't look at what you've done. No, I look at that. It means to take responsibility for how you contributed to where we are now, and to take responsibility for that, and to make a commitment to work on stopping it. And the structural racism is woven into our fiber, our education system, our health systems, all of the systems that we've set up, and most obviously our economic systems. It's going to take generations of this to unravel it. When I've done the work that I've done with different racial groups, and they say, when will this come to an end? The comment I've made is going to be about 625 generations.
Oh, God. That makes sense.
Yeah. And it's because of the intergenerational transmission of the trauma that gets passed on generation after generation, from families to children, and from their children to their children. I just found out 2 weeks ago, I have a family in California, and everyone in the house came down with the virus. When I was talking to my cousin who had just come out of, is a survivor, he informed me that the way that we got to Illinois was because I had two great uncles who were about to be lynched. They had served in the Army. They got back to Arkansas and refused to be put refused to be treated like a quote in person. And they were told, you better leave town or else you will be dead. My whole family moved up from Arkansas and Mississippi into Illinois, into Michigan, into Iowa. The driving force behind it was racial terrorism from the white community. I didn't know that. But what did get passed on to me was that colored people are inferior. What got passed on to me is you better know your place if you want to live. What got passed on to me is you come from proud Black people who love who we are and where we come from, but there's still a lot of trauma that we have to work through. So all of that to me is the diaspora that helps us to understand what's going on, and the fact that forgiveness without recognition is meaningless. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a big part of this. I think folks don't realize, it's like, yes, I can forgive you, but you have to recognize, and there has to be a consequence for your behavior. Like when folks were talking about, well, oh, Amy Cooper, you shouldn't have lost your job, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, actually, she should have been arrested.
Yeah.
Because it's like, unless you see a consequence for your actions, things will not change. Because the consequence for her actions, had it been any other situation, could have been in his death. Or the fact that she put every Black man in that park's life at risk.
Yes.
Because it's just a Black man harassing a white lady. That could be anybody. There's no discernible factor. And you get the one cop who's, more militaristic, and you have the Central Park Five all over again.
Yes. It was more than just the one cop, though, wasn't it? It was the silent bystanders.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, I don't know if most people know that the police officer was married to a Hmong woman. Did you know that?
No.
He was Southeast Asian. His wife is Southeast Asian. I think they're getting a divorce now. Right. And so you see these complex relationships. But of course, there is no connecting his being married to a woman from Southeast Asia and his understanding of racism.
Right.
The other thing that I read was that he and Mr. Floyd worked for the same organization in the bar.
Yeah. I read that. And it's like,
Yeah.
well,
He probably never saw him because it's, surplus visibility. You just one Black man like all the others.
right.
But he had also been charged different times when using brute force. So that, that whole area, that whole notion of violence doesn't stop along racial lines. It's a heavy gender piece that's also thrown in there. So when you start unpacking oppression, you start looking at how deep it is in terms of our gender and our race. So I'm just very frightened about where we're going to go if the violence continues.
It's really just heartbreaking.
Yes, it is. It is. So Laura, how did you get interested in looking at these areas? I know I'm turning the questions around to see
I love how this isn't the rules of how this show works, Portia. I ask the questions. I don't get asked.
Okay.
No, but for you, why am I interested in this?
Yeah.
Because it affects me. It affects my family. We're an immigrant family. I have 2 older brothers who are the loveliest people on earth, and it's terrifying.
Okay.
To think about what's happening right now. But also, I've had plenty of Amy Coopers in my career stop me from going where I needed to go. I've had really weird, like, terrifying incidences with the police where it's just like, what? No. And my response has been, well, how can I educate? How can I be a voice? How can I be a conduit? How can I, this is a bit unusual for the show, whereby like I tend to always, come from a happy-go-lucky place, because like part of the reason I started this show was to show joy, especially for people in business who do such hard work and oftentimes don't get the shine. And which is why you'll notice there's lots of Black women who come on the show who you've probably never heard of because they're so busy doing the work. But I also think for all of that, we do have to have these conversations.
Yes, we do.
And I know that I have an audience that is very racially diverse. And if they can hear it from me, maybe that goes a little bit longer than going to hear it from someone else. And we have people on our show who can speak to this, which is why I was so thrilled to have you on this show. So that's why, Portia.
Oh yeah. Well, it's all connected, right? The business, how we spend money, what we do, and what we invest in. It's all connected, and that's the irony of all this. I mean, when you get to the end of the day, for me, it's looking back and saying, I am the oppressed. I have the power to also be an oppressor. I'm on both sides of that continuum. When you were mentioning about consequences, what do we learn about that? Well, the consequences for too long for people of color has been you get wiped out. The consequences for many Euro white men is that you get a slap on the wrist. If that. You might even get a promotion. If that. And if you're found guilty and you go to jail and you know the right people, you could have your record expunged. I mean, if you look at all of the stuff that's been happening in the last 4 years with all of these arrests in the political arena, and you see the quote, real thugs in the White House, you can do what you want to do and you will get off. You can get off. That would have never happened if the roles were reversed. So it's throughout our whole culture. I mean, look at the Senate. And I know the political stuff, I probably shouldn't be crossing that area, but I do have a lot of strong feelings about it.
Go for it.
So I can arrange to have someone killed and get a slap on the wrist. And for people of color, our lives have been expendable for a long time. Wow. And I think we're bursting at the seams with the rage and not knowing how to heal it. But we've got to do it if we are to survive. Someone said it's almost a metaphor that we would get this virus because it's forcing us to move beyond our identities, because we are now realizing, heck yeah, we are all connected. That's right. We are all connected. And if we don't get that and begin to deal with saving this planet, we can, no pun intended, go up in smoke. If not, right. If not from inside, from outside. So we better get it. The thing that bothers me, Laura, also is, when I look at the micro level of what happens with our children and our families and the legacy that we pass on, we've got to do something to begin to raise healthy kids. We've got to do something. We've got to understand that being silent is not an action. And so the whole complex picture is there for me. I do the little bit that I can do.
Of course.
Yeah. To transform.
So question for you, looking back on all the things that you've done, what would you tell 25-year-old Portia?
That's a great question. One of the things I've told young people or millennials is that I'm really proud of them. I'm proud of them because a lot of them get it, what this is about. The other thing I would tell them, or that I have told them, is clean your little raggedy act up. Clean it up. You have to be responsible to your community. You have to be responsible to the life that we're bringing into the world. You have to be acknowledged that when you want to pass a legacy on, that it's more than just the money you leave, it's the values that you leave, that's important. And that we are not going to abandon you. That we are not going to abandon you. The fear is there that the baby boomers won't leave anything for anybody else. Maybe we need to look at what our values are and say, is what we're leaving worth it? It's more than just leaving you things that's important. It's leaving you values. And knowing that, again, that we're all connected. That when I cut your arm off, I cut my own arm off. When I choke you, I choke myself. We've got to help people to understand the connection.
That's so very true. So in the midst of some rather darkness, what do you do for your self-care?
Well, one of the things I do is probably not a real self-care thing, but I love spice drops. I'm giving them up. But anyway, no, what I do, I meditate. I get I get uh, massages. I get acupuncture. I
Pre-COVID, obviously. COVID.
Right now, I'm for self-care, I'm learning how to deal with this aging process. I'm just finding out at this point in my life that I have a lot in common with people that were born around the same time I was born, that we got to manage these changing bodies. Uh, I have a wonderful support group of people that I love very deeply and that I am in constant contact with. My goal is to bring joy and to bring compassion and mindfulness to people whose lives I touch. Is to be authentic with that. Yeah. So self-care to me is emotional, psychological, and biological. All of that's in it. Uh, yeah.
Awesome. And so necessary. So, as with anything, everything on the podcast, I still ask the same last question.
Okay.
You have an give and or an ask of the audience.
Wow. So what do I want to say to the audience?
Yeah, you can say, I'd like to give to the audience, 3 tips on blah, 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 or by the ask of the audience to be kind to yourself, whatever you'd like.
Be authentic with yourself. Look at things that you've done that people have criticized you about you. Take it on and look at it. Only you can control the change that you want to be in your life. And if you don't look at yourself, you're not going to help other people grow in a positive way.
Awesome. That's phenomenal. Portia, I could talk to you for hours, and I feel like I've learned so much in just a short amount of time. But it was karmic timing in terms of us getting introduced at this particular moment, and
Yeah.
I do believe that everything does happen for a reason. So I can't thank you enough for taking some time to talk today. I know that this episode will help a lot of folks who look like us, but I think a lot as well of folks who don't. So thank you so very much.
Thank you too, Laura. Sending you a hug.
Receiving it.
Okay, sweetheart.
And so we'll put the information in the show notes if you want to reach out to Dr. Hunt. She is phenomenal and has written tons. And listen to the woman, learn, and take a look at yourself in the mirror. And I think a lot will go a long way. And that is our show.